Hi, I'm James Johnson, founder and CEO coach. Welcome to Peer Effect, the podcast where your peers will tell you what's unlocking their 10 million plus business. In today's episode, Clare and I explore how to have the most effective relationship with your number two. Remember to hit the subscribe button before we get started. And now on with the show. So Clare, welcome to the show.
Good morning, James. Lovely to be here.
So today we're going to talk about the importance of the number two and how founders can really magnify that relationship. I'm just before we start there, what's your origin story? What's got you to this point?
Oh, goodness me. Well, my background in a very cotted version is I've now been coaching for 10 years, having run a marketing consultancy before. So my whole time there was working with scaling businesses, SMEs, family businesses, and getting very involved way beyond the marketing. I suppose that's what led me into exploring coaching and where I am today, working in those sort of businesses in a different way. And I come from a family business. My parents are farmers and cheesemakers, and my husband runs a family business as well, a farm, and we run a conference centre. So very much from an entrepreneurial, hard-working background. So hopefully that means that I'm well placed to coach in this space. That's sort of my very potted journey to get here.
I mean, your journey normally is quite fast. I mean, you just your first marathon. It was certainly a fast one.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably too old to be starting marathons, but yes, I did my first one and went straight in with the London Marathon, and yes, very proudly came in just under 4 hours and raised about £7,000 for scoliosis research and support, as our daughter has scoliosis. But I run all my life, but the first time I've tackled a marathon, so pretty proud of that accomplishment this year. One of the bucket list ticks done.
And what we talked about this history of bringing it from marketing into coaching. What is it about the number two role that has attracted you and made one of your specialisms?
To be totally honest, an inadvertent specialism in that often I found I started over the last few years getting referred by other coaches that were perhaps in a business coaching the founder stroke CEO, and they then realised this is working. Actually, my number two could do with coaching, and through a sort of coaching network, I've been reached out to as that person to come in to provide that support, because often it's not appropriate, or rarely is it appropriate, that the number two is coached by the same coach as the CEO founder. So I found myself creating a bit of an unplanned specialism in this area on that relationship with the number two. And in some ways, I suppose, just to expand, because I'm from a marketing business development background, often the number two is COO, CFO, although not always, but that's a common role. And I find that because that isn't my background, almost conversely, that works well, because I'm challenging in a different way, because I haven't been the CFO or COO, and although obviously I've got a commercial background, I haven't got a strongly financial or operational background. So I think I look at things differently for them. So when I know some people coach in areas that is their background. For me, I found it's worked not being my background, if that makes sense.
I suppose because you've got a CEO background, so I suppose you can give an insight as to what they're thinking.
Absolutely. I think understanding how to run businesses, having run my own consultancy, we are farming business, and we run a conference centre as well. So having that entrepreneurial background and insight into the minds of founders, I think I have a deep understanding of what's required from a number two, and also what the difficulties can be for the number one CEO founder in that relationship. So yes, James, very insightful in your observation there.
And what are you seeing then? So if you're working across sort of many companies with lots of different number two, like what's some like common trends that you're seeing, like what's working, what's not?
I think it's the CEO founder recognizing the importance and value in that relationship, because sometimes they don't have somebody in that position, and there is a willing candidate in the business who hasn't put their hand up, and they're probably doing the job at the moment, but haven't got the title, and haven't said, please, can I have that? But are happily doing it. And I think it's recognizing that it's needed, recognizing that you might have that person right there next to you, that they need some elevation and more autonomy in the role and more permission to challenge. I think having that permission to challenge the CEO founder is vital. And often that's lacking in that they may quite happily accept it, but they haven't given that permission. And I think that sort of counteraction and balance of those two at the top can be so powerful. And sometimes it's there and it's not really, the fire hasn't quite been lit under that relationship.
So what does, that's a lovely phrase, that permission challenge, what does that practically look like in terms of giving someone permission to challenge?
I think that sometimes the number two can be slightly in awe, particularly when the CEO is a founder, because as I know many founders are listening to this podcast, hopefully, or have listened to many previous ones of yours, founders are invariably full of ideas, full of energy, and want to make things happen now. And that number two, particularly because of the CEO, COO, CFO role, can put the calm, the breaks, the questioning, the evaluation of a situation into the relationship mix. And if they're allowed to do that, that dynamic is phenomenal. But sometimes they can be frustrated and not feel they're allowed. So when I say permission, it's as simple as the number one saying, I want to be challenged. In the room, you push back and do that. And I know that sounds really easy and really simple, but sometimes that just doesn't happen. And my role as a coach is finding ways to enable that challenge so that that relationship fires better when perhaps it's not, or it's there, but it's not quite doing all it can.
When you say that, what I'm hearing is that there's a degree of self-permission, like even if the founder's explicit, let's say the COO needs to give them self-permission at the same time, but also I wonder whether there are things the CEO can do that sort of subsequently undercut that permission. It's kind of like, I give you permission, but then with my words I give you permission, but with my behaviour I'm kind of removing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like you said, you can verbally say, please challenge me. And then when you're challenged, be defensive, not listen, plough on anyway. And it's really, again, by that relationship, I mean, it's great if both have a coach, a different coach, and not to advertise coaching, but obviously works if you've got two good coaches, seeing the benefit of that relationship. And yes, saying things verbally is one thing, but stopping, listening, responding, and allowing that relationship to flourish is really important. And there is a responsibility on both sides to enable the development of the relationship.
And so when you're working, given that let's say you're just working with the COO and someone else is working with the founder, what sort of things would you be saying to the COO to help them to give themselves this permission?
I think a lot is around confidence. I think we all think you've got to that position in a business, so obviously you must be a confident individual, but that's not always the case. People get to or achieve their roles through hard work, through doing well, and working up through the SLT into that C-suite. And sometimes in smaller scaling businesses, maybe even haven't had that much experience of SLT C-suite and have been elevated at pace. And so when when you have that speed of coming into that role, I think testing things out. So as a coach, we might talk through scenarios, talk through what the reaction might be, what can be said to elicit a different reaction, and to be bold enough to do that and to react in the moment. And I think sometimes not feeling confident because of that great respect for the person that's developed the business. And I think something else that is really important in this relationship, sorry James, I go off at tangents because I'm very passionate about this. It's really important that the number one understands that often the number two is treating the business as their own. Particularly in a scaling business, they are fully invested, they are giving everything, they are passionate about it, but it isn't their own. There may be equity, there may be a part in it, but it isn't their own. I think that the number one has to value what's being put in a very similar way to what they're putting in, and respecting that relationship both ways, again, to get the best value from it.
It feels like quite a delicate dance then, because a lot of founders have a co-founder, and so by nature you've got two different roles which are in a very similar power position. And I think what you're exploring there is just that it can feel like a symbiotic relationship, but there's a certain fundamental power imbalance.
Yes, and I think particularly when you're not co-founders, you are actually in the job, and the founder, or whether even if it's not a founder, if it's just the CEO. But I think my experience is quite often with founder CEOs or founders that have become the CEO, and that's where that relationship can perhaps be more delicate, because the founder themselves may not be fully equipped to be a CEO. So they're feeling their way being a CEO, and they're learning, hopefully with a very good coach, but they're learning as well. So everyone's learning on the job. My reference point here, what I'm talking about, is scaling businesses, not so much corporate established businesses. So there's a lot of learning, and that openness to learning and recognizing that both parties are learning together, like any good relationship. I think the number two, recognizing that the founder isn't perfect in their role, they are learning as well. And if they can be open with each other and almost call that out, then they can learn together in different ways.
Because that's quite an point to say, the idea that the CEO might not be perfect, might be learning as well, because I suppose that also might make them potentially a bit more defensive when challenged as well. If they're feeling insecure or potentially out of their depth, or like they're not experts, that could lead to quite an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, totally. I think we're all learning, aren't we? That's what makes life so interesting. What we do as coaches, we're learning all the time with every new person we meet, every business we go into. And there's never a complete finished package. But I think in scaling businesses, not only are you learning your role changes as the business changes, as the business grows, the pace it grows at, the current world environment, politics, economics, wars, everything that's affecting us at the moment, investors, those relationships. There is constant learning. And I just think that's where, like any good marriage or personal relationship, a level of vulnerability and openness that people are comfortable with. I feel that coaching plays a part in enabling people to see that's okay. It's not dangerous to let people in. Your number two should be someone you implicitly trust and you want to drive your business forward with. And if you don't have that level of trust, then perhaps there's a question mark whether you're the best duo to be taking the business forward. And you perhaps have to ask yourself that question as well.
Interesting. So what might, if you're a founder listening, think, oh, maybe I don't trust this person enough. How does that play out? What signals are you seeing?
Yes, but hope some of those questions aren't asked after this podcast, but if they are, that's good. I think if you're listening to this and anything resonates, my thoughts, if you don't have that relationship, you should be asking them into the room and developing a relationship like this. And if you're not doing that and you're not feeling that you can develop in an yeah, absolutely. Ask yourself questions. Why? Is that on your part? Are you holding something back? And do you need to work on yourself to enable that? Is it something about the person that you've got in the number 2 position? Are they right? Are they ready? And I think an interesting question there or thought is some people in that number 2 position, that's where they want to stay. And that's what they're really good at. And they are brilliant number 2s. And some are they're sort of number 1s in waiting, whether it's in that business or whether it's in another business in the future, and the CEO founder recognizes that they may go somewhere else. So that's a slightly different sort of person as well. Someone that's got that ambition to be a CEO versus someone that is a really, really good number 2, either equally fine. If you've got someone that's a CEO in waiting, make sure that you're comfortable. That are they CEO in waiting for you, your business, or are you equipping them to move somewhere else? And make sure you're not holding them back, because the right decision might be at some point they do go somewhere else if you're not stepping away, and you'll get the best out of your number 2 if you support them in their career development rather than much as any role in career development.
Do you think whether you've got a number, like a number 1 in waiting or someone who's happening to, do you think that makes a difference to trust levels, or is it just purely a developmental sort of type of conversation that you're having with them?
I think as with anything, it's about the 2 people in their relationship. I think some people openly take someone on as a successor. Some don't. It's a CFO perhaps that's then accelerating and developing. And I don't think it should make any difference in the relationship, but you have to be open with yourself and with each other about, and it may evolve and develop. You have a high flying number 2 that comes in at a certain age, and then they grow and they've got potential to develop into the next role as well.
And when it comes to building that trust, I mean, you get like part of it's a performance thing, but sometimes partly a relationship thing. Which do you feel comes first? Like, are you, as a founder, are you focusing on building the relationship first over performance, or are you focusing on performance and then so the relationship comes?
That's a tricky question, James, isn't it? I feel like I'm definitely being coached here as well. I don't think I can say that there's a blueprint for that. I think it depends on the person. For some people, they just cannot develop a deep relationship or a sort of functional, skills-based delivery relationship without that personal element first. Some people, it's all about delivery, and they can tolerate somebody if they deliver in the right way. I do feel, from my experience, and obviously I can only use my experience, that in scaling businesses, I think personal relationship does play a very big part, because it's sort of their baby, their business. And I think if you can have that personal relationship where the number 2 feels really invested in the business, if I had to choose, I'd put that first. I think there's almost, you can teach skills, you can develop skills over time and delivery, but if you've got a good personal relationship, but that doesn't mean you have to be best friends. I think they're different things. I think there's a recognition that you've got different skills. Someone who's number 2 often isn't, they're not a founder by definition. They may become a CEO, but some leave and found things, but your different personalities. So it's recognizing the strengths in your differences. You don't have to be best friends, but I do think respect and trust are foundations to having a good relationship and having openness and transparency as far as you possibly can.
Would you go as far as say, like, you should enjoy the relationship?
I think it makes work is always better if you can enjoy the relationship. I know from a coaching perspective, I don't have to be best friends with the people I coach. And I coach all sorts of different people, different personalities, different genders, different ages. But I respect the people I coach and I enjoy working with them and I enjoy seeing their development. And I think that's the same in any good functioning. And I suppose it depends on your definition of enjoyment as well. But that we could go down a whole different rabbit hole there.
Well, if we let's say, again, founders are seeing you thinking, oh, my number two isn't performing. It's sometimes tempting to think, oh, well, there's something they're not doing right. Maybe there is. But what do you see like founders do that they could do? What could they change about what they're doing before they sort of point the finger too much at their number two?
I think you always have to look at yourself first, don't you? I think it's very easy at any level in a business with any team to jump to lack of performance. And my question is always, are you equipping them to perform? Are you setting them up to be their best? I know it sounds cliched, but are you setting them up for success? And maybe you're not. Maybe you're just assuming they're getting on with things and you're not opening the door to these conversations. You're not letting them back to what we said, you have permission to challenge. Maybe you're not challenging them. And you're not developing them. And I think you have to really look at the conditions that you're setting up for them before you start pointing the finger, and look at all of that first and give them every opportunity. If then there's still question marks, that's when you have to look, is it outside of yourself? But usually when something's not functioning, there's something on both sides. Now, it might be as number one founder, CEO, you're like, well, this is the way I am, and I have to find someone to work with that. That's a decision you have the prerogative to make. But usually in a relationship, those people have to work at it.
So it sounds like we've got permission to challenge, we've got sort of almost caring about their development and understanding where they are. Like, are they sort of a number one in waiting, or are they a sort of fundamental number two? Sort of so that there is still this kind of slight, there is an employee dynamic, there's an employer-employee dynamic in this, as well as this also trying to get almost a peer-to-peer relationship at the same time. So it feels quite complex as a relationship.
I think it is complex, and I think a number two also has the added element that they're sort of conduit between the founder CEO and the broader SLT. So they are, they've got a lot of things to do because they are perhaps the operational head to a certain degree of the business. They are sat at the table with the investors. They may be privy to information that the rest of the SLT isn't privy to, that they have to carry. There's a lot at play for them. And I think it's a really fascinating role. They may, CFO, COO, or joint role. They're in charge of the numbers. That's a tough gig, and it's tough out there at the moment as well. And I think they have an awful lot on their plate, and I think there has to be a respect from the number one for what they are. Behind the scenes as well, something I do encourage with clients that I work with in this role is to go out and build your own profile as well, to build your own networks, your own relationships. That's good for the business because it's not all just about the number one, but it's also good for your own career, your own development, and you can get very sucked in to being there in the business, and you need to make sure you're out learning from other peers, listening, seeing what's going on out there, and don't get isolated. Because everyone always says about the lonely number one. I think it can be lonely with a great deal of complexity at the number two level as well.
Yeah, I can see that. You're not quite a peer to either level. Like you're not quite a peer to the CEO, and you're not quite a peer to the SLT. You're kind of stuck a bit in no man's land.
Yeah, it can be difficult, definitely. And that's obviously where a good coach comes in, because you've got someone to talk to and work through those. It also gives you a lot of strengths because of your position of really understanding what's going on at the top table and then what's going on in the business. And you perhaps can have eyes down through the business in a way that a number one can't always have. And I think that's really important as well.
So that leads on to real estate. So we've talked about like where it's not working, but like when it's really working in this relationship, how do you feel that, and what's the benefit to the business?
I mean, it's just, if that's working, it just helps. It's great to see. I think both people enjoy it. Obviously, from my point of view, I usually just see one side, because I think you often, as I said, have two coaches for confidentiality, and just makes it cleaner in those two roles. But that dynamic, that balance, I suppose it's like, if there is such a thing, perfect marriage, but you can have good arguments, stroke debates, discussions in a healthy way, and you get the best from both person. It doesn't mean they always agree, but it does mean that you get those two skills, those two different characters, relationship management. I think it helps the broader business, and they both enjoy it. I think it's really important, and it's important when business is tough, particularly. I mean, that relationship's easier when things are going well. It's really tested when things are harder, and I think great things can come from it. At their best, their job is to bring the best out in each other, and that benefits everyone and everything, and importantly the business.
And this is going to be a hard question, I'm just going to flag that. Sometimes I speak to founders and like, oh, I wish I had a co-founder. And they always try and create like a mock co-founder. And just from what you've seen, do you think there's anything inherently better about having a co-founder or having a CEO and a COO dynamic? Both cases, you've got two people at the top of business, but it's set up slightly differently. Do you have any view on like which one's better?
I have more reference of not co-founder and having a number two in the business rather than a co-founder taking that role. So it's definitely more my point of reference. I think it depends who the co-founder is. Is the co-founder a friend, a partner in terms of, a personal partner? And then you've got other dynamics at play as well that can add complexity. The benefit is possibly it's more equal if it's co-founder, but there can also maybe be more potential for clash because you haven't got that slight step between the two. But it is a tough question for me because most of my reference is not with co-founders. It is more with someone in that role separately. So I'm not sure if I've clearly answered the question, but I've done the best I can, James.
Well, it feels like they are different relationships, but both can be dysfunctional, both can be highly functional.
Yeah, like all relationships, yeah. And it is about the working at it. And I think recognising, if there is I do have good reference from family businesses, which I suppose is similar, where I do work with sort of spousal integration, intergenerational relationships, siblings, and, you have a whole different set of emotions at play that sometimes can blind what a business needs. And I suppose you don't have that element if you don't have those relationships. Obviously, that's more from a family perspective. But, you know, sometimes that deep knowledge of people through family and friendships is really powerful, but it can also be used to hurt people as well. So I think there's pros and cons all round, and as coming back to just needing to work at it and recognise that.
Yeah. And it feels like in some ways the clarity of that, often co-founder pairings do have a senior, despite shareholdings might be equal, there is often a senior one and a junior one. And I suppose in some ways the CEO, COO dynamic just makes that more explicit. And often you end up in a CEO, COO, co-founder pair, or CEO, CTO.
I think also, Jim, just to add there, somebody has to be the CEO, I think. And where I've seen it work better, if you recognise that, if you've got 2 or 3 of you or whatever it is, if someone's actually given that title and they're given the mandate to be the one in charge, I think that's important. Otherwise, decisions perhaps aren't made. And ultimately, somebody needs to be that ultimate decision maker.
And that's quite a hard transition to go through for co-founder pairings, is that's one person stepping up to be it often happens at the scaling phase. As you build a management team, someone needs to be that person. And if it's already defined, then I suppose you're dodging that particular bullet.
Well, not everyone wants to. Sometimes nobody wants to step up and someone has to be pushed, and that's hard because it's difficult to step into that or feel you are the one now in charge with perhaps friends or partners as a sort of personal partner point of view. It's about giving permission, isn't it? I think it's back to wherever it is. If there's permission, then you all have to stand by the permission that you've given.
Yeah. Well, to wrap up then, for founders listening, what is one thing they finish this podcast, they go back to their office, and they're thinking about, what's the one thing I can do to really magnify my number 2? What would you suggest?
If you haven't actually labelled the number 2, because sometimes there can be a really good, head of ops sat there or head of finance that is operating as number 2, but you haven't given them the title because you think, it doesn't matter, they don't mind, and they don't want to put their hand up. Actually, it does matter. It matters for them. It matters because you'll probably respect them a bit more, and it matters for the rest of the business and externally. So make sure that you are recognising the person who is playing that role. I think that is really important. And if anything that we've discussed this morning resonates in some way and you think, I really need to have a chat with my number 2, go out and take them for lunch. Go and have a really good talk. Make sure that you are working on that relationship, whether that's ensuring that you are having touch points, because sometimes there's just this assumption we busily through businesses talk about touch points with heads of and their teams, and all this goes on, and there'll be a structure, particularly as businesses grow, but that number 1, number 2 perhaps don't have a one-to-one because they just get on with the job and they have autonomy. But even if it's just a one-to-one to check in that they're okay, on a one-to-one and 2 or one-on-one to ask them difficult questions or have difficult questions asked of you, I think that's really, really important. So if nothing else, make sure you're not ignoring the good person you've got in the business. Give them the title. If you are listening to this and think, I don't have a number 2, go and try and find one if you need one. If you're at that stage, as many probably need a number 2 and haven't got them. And this hopefully will help you think about what you need from that person. But most importantly, put some regular time in with them and work relationship constantly, consistently, continuously, particularly in the challenging times we've got out there at the moment, because it can make massive difference to where you're at if this relationship is flourishing.
Claire, thank you for this. This has been super helpful. I love the permission to challenge concept at the beginning, but I think that's a really nice takeaway, and just focus on the relationship, make it explicit, and don't take it for granted.
Like any relationship, don't take people for granted and respect them.
Remember to subscribe if you want more actual insight from founders scaling now. See you next week, and happy scaling.